The banquet was where invisible people learned to disappear. And as Briar moved through the glittering crowd with a tray balanced on her trembling hands, she had perfected the art of being no one. Head bowed, eyes low, footsteps silent. The nobility of Valanthir didn't see servants. They saw furniture that moved, shadows that poured wine and cleared plates. That invisibility had kept Briar alive for 3 years since her family's disgrace. It was the only protection she had left. So when the Queen Mother stopped mid-conversation, turned her ancient silver eyes toward the servant girl in the corner, and went utterly still, Briar felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Mother?" The Alpha King's voice cut through the hall, cold, emotionless, a voice that matched the frost in his pale gaze. The Queen Mother didn't look away from Briar. Her weathered hand rose slowly, pointing directly at her. "Same son," she whispered, loud enough for the nearest nobles to hear. "That girl, that is your fated mate." The hall fell silent. 500 wolves stopped breathing at once. King Drystan of Valanthir, the Alpha who had refused every princess and noblewoman for 12 years, looked at Briar for the first time. His gaze held nothing, no shock, no curiosity, no recognition of the bond his mother claimed existed. Only winter. "Remove her," he said. But Briar would learn soon enough that removal was not rejection, that the coldest kings burned with secrets they could never speak aloud, and that fate had a cruel way of binding together two people desperately trying to stay apart. Neither of them understood what that bond would cost. Vaulted ceilings stretched toward darkness like the ribcage of some ancient beast. The great hall of Valanthir had been built to intimidate, and tonight it fulfilled that purpose magnificently. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears. Long tables groaned under platters of roasted meats and honeyed fruits, while wolves in silk and velvet circled each other with smiles that never reached their eyes. This was the Spring Ascension Banquet, the annual celebration of King Drystan's coronation, and every unmated noble within 1,000 miles had found an excuse to attend. They weren't here for the food. Briar kept her head down as she wove between perfumed bodies and clicking heels. Her servant's dress was plain gray, deliberately shapeless. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it tugged at her temples. The small brand on her wrist marked her as bonded labor, property of the castle. But hidden beneath her sleeve, on her upper arm where no one could see, lay another mark entirely. The crossed circle her father had burned into her flesh the night he cast her out. The sign of a voidborn. Everything about her appearance had been designed to say one thing: I am not worth noticing. 3 years of practice had made her nearly perfect at it. She approached a cluster of noblewomen, their laughter sharp and performative. One of them gestured lazily without looking at her. Briar stepped forward, poured wine into the extended glass, stepped back. Invisible. Safe. "They say he hasn't taken a woman to his bed in 4 years," one noblewoman whispered to another. "Longer than that," her companion replied. "Not since Lady Corinth." "The one who died?" A meaningful pause. "The very one." Briar's hand trembled slightly. She steadied it before anyone could notice. She knew the rumors. Everyone did. Lady Corintha had been the king's intended mate 8 years ago. Beautiful, powerful, from an impeccable bloodline. The match had been celebrated across all 5 kingdoms. Then she died the night before their bonding ceremony. Found cold in her chambers, her heart simply stopped. No wound, no poison, no explanation. The king had never spoken of her since. He had never looked at another woman with anything but ice. "Perhaps he's incapable," the first noblewoman giggled. "Perhaps the cold runs deeper than his demeanor." "Careful, Vereen," a third woman cut in. "Wolves have excellent hearing." Briar drifted away before she could hear more. She didn't need gossip about the king. She needed to survive this night, collect her wages, and disappear back to the servants' quarters where she belonged, where no one would ever think to look for the last daughter of House Ashford, the disgraced, the void-born, the curse-carrier. Briar's jaw tightened as the old shame coiled in her chest. She pushed it down, buried it where she buried everything else. Survival first. Feelings never. She was refilling her tray at the servants' station when a prickling sensation crawled up the back of her neck. The unmistakable feeling of being watched. Briar turned slowly, scanning the crowded hall, hundreds of wolves laughing, drinking, scheming. None of them looking her way. None except one. The Queen Mother sat in a high-backed chair at the edge of the royal dais. She was ancient, her white hair piled in elaborate braids, and her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of centuries lived. Most wolves her age had long since passed. That she remained was considered either a blessing or an omen, depending on who you asked. Her silver eyes were fixed directly on Briar. Not through her, not past her. At her. Briar's blood turned to ice. She dropped her gaze immediately, pulse spiking. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. The Queen Mother couldn't possibly... Girl. The voice was soft, but carried across the noise like a blade through silk. Briar looked up to find the Queen Mother rising from her chair. Rising and walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. The conversations nearby faltered. Heads turned. Briar wanted to run, to disappear, to melt into the stones beneath her feet. She couldn't move. The Queen Mother stopped 3 feet away. Her silver eyes roamed over Briar's face, her hidden figure beneath the shapeless dress, the servant's brand on her wrist. Something stirred behind the old woman's gaze. Recognition? Horror? Wonder? Briar couldn't tell. "What is your name, child?" the Queen Mother asked. Briar's throat closed. She couldn't answer. If she spoke her true name, everything would unravel. But lying to the Queen Mother was treason. Before she could decide, a new voice sliced through the tension. Mother. The Alpha King stood 10 feet away. Briar hadn't heard him approach, hadn't felt him move. But there he was, tall and broad and terrifying in his perfect stillness. His eyes weren't on his mother, they were on Briar. And for one endless moment the air vanished from her lungs entirely. King Drystan of Valanthir was not beautiful. Beauty was too gentle a word, too warm. It implied softness, approachability, something you might want to touch. Looking at the Alpha King, Briar understood why lesser wolves called him the Winter Throne. His features were sharp as cut glass. His hair was black, falling past his shoulders in a way that should have seemed unkempt, but instead looked deliberately savage. His skin was pale, almost unnaturally so, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds gathering over frozen mountains. He looked at Briar as if she were an equation he was trying to solve. She dropped into a curtsy so fast her knees cracked against stone. "Your Majesty." "Rise." His voice held no inflection, no command, just fact. She rose on trembling legs. The Queen Mother hadn't moved. She stood between them, her silver eyes still fixed on Briar with that terrible intensity. "Mother," the king said again, "what is this? Can you not feel it?" The old woman's voice held something Briar couldn't identify. Not quite joy, not quite grief. "Can you not sense what she is to you?" The hall had gone quiet around them. Briar could feel hundreds of gazes pressing against her back like physical weight. Nobles who had never glanced at her twice were now staring with naked curiosity. "She's a servant," the king said flatly. "She is your mate." The word landed like a thunderclap. Briar's heart seized. Simply seized between one beat and the next. She was still standing, still breathing somehow, but her heart had forgotten how to function. Mate. The Queen Mother had said mate. That was impossible. Briar was void-born, cursed from the moment of her birth during the Black Eclipse 22 years ago. The old texts said, void-born wolves carried death in their bond. Any alpha who claimed them would wither within a year. Her previous betrothed, Lord Harwick's son, had died 2 months after their engagement was announced. Fever, the healers said. Coincidence, her father insisted. But everyone knew the truth. Briar was poison. She was a curse, given flesh, and there was no world in which she could be fated to the most powerful alpha alive. You're mistaken, Briar whispered before she could stop herself. The Queen Mother's gaze sharpened. The sight has never failed me in 300 years. Mother, the king's voice cut in, colder now. Enough. He stepped forward, inserting himself between his mother and Briar. This close, she could smell him. Pine and frost and something metallic, like the air before a blizzard. She could also feel something else. A tug at the center of her chest, faint but undeniable, like a thread being pulled taut. No, 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 no. I don't acknowledge fate, the king announced, loudly enough for the watching nobles to hear. The bond my mother claims to see is irrelevant. I will not be taking a mate. Least of all, a servant of unknown origin. The words should have been a relief. They were exactly what Briar needed to hear. Rejection meant safety. Rejection meant she could disappear again. Instead, something deep inside her howled with unexpected pain. She crushed it immediately. Remove her from the hall, the king commanded. See that she's returned to whatever duties she was neglecting. Guards materialized beside Briar, hands closed around her arms, firm but not cruel. She let them steer her away, kept her head down, played the part of the humiliated servant because that was all she could do. But as they led her toward the servant's entrance, she made the mistake of looking back. The king was watching her go. His features remained unchanged. Still cold, still empty, still utterly unreadable. But his hands, clasped behind his back where no one else could see them, were shaking. The servants' quarters occupied the eastern wing, far from the grandeur of the main castle. Briar's room was barely larger than a closet, containing only a narrow cot and a wash basin. It was cramped and cold and perfect. No one important ever came here. She sat on her cot with her knees drawn to her chest, trying to slow her racing thoughts. The Queen Mother was wrong. She had to be wrong. The site was legendary, yes, supposedly infallible. But Briar was void-born. Fated mates didn't exist for wolves like her. The universe didn't give curses and blessings to the same soul. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling for that strange tug she'd experienced in the hall. Nothing. Silence. Perhaps she'd imagined it. Please, she whispered to no one. Please let this disappear. Hours passed. The noise from the banquet eventually faded as guests retired or left. Briar didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw storm-colored eyes staring back at her. Midnight came and went. She was finally beginning to drift when 3 sharp knocks struck her door. Briar bolted upright, her chest tight with sudden fear. Who's there? The door opened without her permission. A royal guard stood in the frame, his expression carefully blank. The king demands your presence, he said. Now. Briar's blood turned to ice. I don't... There must be some mistake. His Majesty made it clear. His Majesty, the guard interrupted, does not repeat commands. You will come with me, or you will be carried. The choice is yours. Briar rose on legs that barely held her. She followed the guard out of her room, through corridors that grew wider and more ornate with every turn. Away from the servants' quarters, toward the royal wing, toward him. The doors to the king's private study were 20 feet tall and carved with wolves mid-hunt. The guard knocked once, then pushed them open. Enter, he said. Alone. Briar stepped through. The room was vast and cold. A fire burned in the hearth, but it seemed to produce no warmth. Shelves lined every wall, heavy with books and maps. And standing by the window, his back to her, was the Alpha King. He didn't turn as the doors closed behind her. "You will tell me your true name," he said, "and you will tell me why my mother believes you are my mate." Briar's nails dug into her palms. "Your Majesty, I'm no one. A servant. I don't know why. Don't lie to me." He turned then, and Briar saw what the distance in the great hall had hidden. His lips were faintly blue. His skin wasn't just pale, it was nearly translucent at the edges. And his eyes, those winter storm eyes, held something beneath the cold. Pain. Carefully controlled, ruthlessly suppressed, but unmistakably present. "I know a hidden wolf when I see one," he said quietly. "Your bearing, your speech, the way you move. You weren't born to service. You were made for it. Remade." He tilted his head. "So I'll ask once more. Who are you?" Briar's resolve crumbled. "Briar," she whispered. "Briar of House Ashford." His features rearranged almost imperceptibly. Recognition? Calculation? "Ashford?" he repeated. "The disgraced house. The one that produced a void-born daughter." "Yes. The one whose curse supposedly killed her betrothed." Briar flinched. "Yes." The king studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Something colder. "Then we are perfectly matched," he said. "A curse that kills and a king who cannot live." Before Briar could ask what he meant, he crossed to his desk and retrieved a document. He held it out to her. "You will marry me in 3 days. You will become queen. And you will never speak of what my mother said tonight to anyone." His gaze locked onto hers. "In return, I swear this. I will never claim you. I will never complete our bond. You will have protection, title, wealth, but you will not have me." Briar stared at the contract in his outstretched hand. "Why?" she managed. "Why would you marry a curse?" For the first time, the king's mask slipped. Just a fraction. Just enough for Briar to see the exhaustion beneath the ice. "Because a curse cannot hurt what is already dying," he said. His fingers brushed hers as she took the contract. They were cold as death. Sleep refused to come. Briar sat in her cramped servant's room until dawn bled through the narrow window, the contract clutched in her hands. The parchment was thick, expensive, stamped with the royal seal. Every word had been written in precise, elegant script. A marriage of convenience. A queen in name only. Protection without possession. It was more than she deserved. More than any void-born had ever been offered. And yet, a curse cannot hurt what is already dying. What had he meant by that? The king was young, barely 30 winters. He was powerful beyond measure, his alpha presence so overwhelming it made lesser wolves physically ill. Dying made no sense. Unless the rumors about Lady Corintha were wrong. Unless her death hadn't been a mystery at all. Unless it had been a beginning. Briar pressed her fingers against her temples. She was overthinking. It didn't matter why the king wanted this arrangement. What mattered was survival. 3 years of scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots. 3 years of hiding her identity and swallowing her pride, all for this single chance to escape the fate her father had promised her. "You'll die in the gutter where you belong," he'd said the night he cast her out. "No wolf will ever want a void-born bride. You're death wearing a pretty face." Now the most powerful wolf in 5 kingdoms wanted exactly that. Briar almost laughed at the irony. A knock at her door made her jump. She shoved the contract beneath her thin mattress and opened the door expecting another guard. Instead, she found a ghost. "Hello, sister." Seren Ashford stood in the corridor, immaculate in emerald silk. Her copper hair was arranged in elaborate curls. Her green eyes held the same calculated cruelty Briar remembered from childhood. The sister who had watched their father beat Briar until she couldn't stand. The sister who had smiled when Briar was cast out. "How did you find me?" Briar's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Did you think I wouldn't notice a servant from our disgraced house suddenly being summoned to the king's private chambers?" Seren stepped forward, forcing Briar to retreat into her tiny room. "The guards talk. Everyone talks. It's all over the castle." Briar's hands curled into fists at her sides. "What do you want?" "To warn you." Serene's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The Queen Mother's declaration has caused quite a stir. Half the court thinks it's a jest. The other half thinks our dear king has finally lost his mind." She tilted her head. "But I know better. You know nothing about me. I know you're void-born." Seren's voice dropped to a whisper. "I know Lord Harwick's son died screaming in his bed 2 months after he touched your hand. I know our mother died giving birth to you during the Black Eclipse, and father always said you drained the life from her womb." Her eyes glittered. "I know what you are, Briar, a curse-given flesh, and I know what happens to anyone foolish enough to bind themselves to you." Briar's throat tightened. "Then you know the king is making a mistake." "Oh, I'm not here to save the king." Seren laughed, soft and cold. "I'm here to save myself. Father has plans for this family, plans that don't include you embarrassing us further. If you go through with this marriage, if you poison the royal bloodline with your curse." She stepped closer, close enough for Briar to smell the rose perfume that couldn't quite mask the rot beneath. "He'll reveal everything. Your identity. Your history. What really happened to Lord Harwick's son." Briar went still. "I didn't kill him." "Didn't you?" Serene's voice was silk over thorns. "You were there that night. You held his hand while the fever took him. The healers said it was like his life just drained away." She paused. "Does the king know he's marrying death itself?" "Get out. He will discover what you are." Seren moved toward the door, her mission apparently complete. "And when he does, not even a crown will protect you. Father will make sure of that." She was gone before Briar could respond. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing inward. Briar sank onto her cot, her whole body shaking. She should run. Take whatever money she'd saved and disappear into the northern territories, where no one knew her name. The king would find another solution to whatever problem drove him to this arrangement. She wasn't worth the trouble she'd bring, but even as she thought it, she knew she couldn't. Running meant returning to invisibility. Running meant spending the rest of her shortened life looking over her shoulder, waiting for her father's men to find her. Running meant admitting that Seren was right, that she was nothing but a curse waiting to kill. Briar pulled the contract from beneath her mattress. Her hands were steady now, steadied by something that felt dangerously like defiance. A curse cannot hurt what is already dying. Maybe the king knew exactly what he was getting. Maybe that was the point. She found a quill on the small desk in the corner, dipped it in ink, and signed her name at the bottom of the contract. Whatever happened next, she would face it standing. The wedding took place 3 days later in the Temple of the Eternal Moon. Briar had expected a small ceremony, private, quiet, something befitting a political arrangement between a desperate king and a disgraced servant. Instead, she found herself walking down an aisle lined with 500 wolves. The temple was ancient, its stone walls carved with images of wolves ascending to the moon. Candles flickered in silver sconces, casting dancing shadows across the gathered nobility. Every face was turned toward her. Every eye held the same burning question. Why her? Why a servant? Why now? Briar kept her gaze forward, fixed on the altar where the king waited. They had given her a wedding dress of midnight blue, so dark it was nearly black. The fabric was heavy, obscuring her figure, and a veil of matching lace covered her face. She'd expected white, the traditional color of bonding ceremonies. The seamstress had smiled when Briar questioned it. His Majesty was specific, she'd said. He wanted you comfortable. He wanted you hidden. Now, walking past nobles who craned their necks trying to glimpse her features, Briar understood. He was protecting her. The realization struck her so hard she almost stumbled. King Drystan stood at the altar in formal black, his expression carved from ice. The royal priest waited beside him, clutching a ceremonial tome. And flanking them both, the Queen Mother watched Briar's approach with those knowing silver eyes. Briar reached the altar. The king extended his hand. She took it. Cold. His skin was so cold it burned. "We are gathered," the priest began, "to witness the binding of King Drystan of Valanthir and Lady Briar of House Ashford in the sacred rite of—" "Ashford?" A voice rang out from the crowd. Briar's blood froze. She knew that voice. Lord Harwick pushed through the nobles, his face twisted with outrage. He was older than she remembered, his hair gone gray, but his eyes held the same hatred that had burned there the night his son died. "This is an outrage!" Lord Harwick pointed at Briar with a trembling finger. "That woman is void-born. She killed my son." Murmurs erupted through the temple. Nobles exchanged shocked glances. Someone gasped. The air refused to fill Briar's lungs. The veil suddenly felt suffocating. The dress too heavy, the altar too exposed. She tried to pull her hand from the king's grip. He held firm. "Lord Harwick." Drystan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through smoke. Not loud, not angry, simply absolute. "You will be silent." "Your Majesty, you don't understand." Harwick strode forward, stopping only when 2 royal guards blocked his path. "That creature is cursed. Anyone who bonds with her will die." "My son." "Your son," Drystan interrupted, "died of fever. I've read the healer's reports. There was no curse, no foul play, only tragedy." "The healers were wrong. Everyone knows what void-born wolves do to their mates. If you complete this bond, I am your king." The words were quiet, but the power behind them made the entire temple shudder. Briar felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the very air she struggled to draw into her lungs. This was alpha dominance at its purest, the kind that made lesser wolves want to bare their throats and beg for mercy. Lord Harwick went pale. His knees buckled. He caught himself on a nearby pew, shaking. "I am your king," Drystan repeated. "And the woman beside me is about to become your queen. You will show her the respect that position demands, or you will discover exactly how unpleasant my dungeons can be." Silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Lord Harwick lowered his head. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," he whispered. Drystan turned back to the priest as if nothing had happened. "Continue." The ceremony resumed. Briar stood in a daze, hearing the words without processing them. Vows were spoken. Rings were exchanged. The king's ring was heavy on her finger, gold embedded with sapphires the color of winter night. When the priest pronounced them bonded, a ripple of anticipation passed through the crowd. They were waiting for the claiming. Among wolves, a true bond required more than words. It required the physical mark of teeth against throat, the mingling of scents that proclaimed ownership to every wolf within 100 miles. Drystan turned to face her. The temple held its breath. He reached up slowly, his cold fingers finding the edge of her veil. Briar's pulse spiked. If he lifted it, everyone would see her face. Everyone would see the void-born brand hidden on her upper arm, might demand she reveal it as proof of what she was. The king's fingers paused at the veil's edge. Then, gently, so gently she almost missed it, he lowered his hand. Instead of lifting her veil, instead of claiming her throat, he raised her gloved hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, cold lips, cold breath. But somehow, impossibly, the gesture felt warm. "My queen," he said, loud enough for the temple to hear. The crowd erupted in confused whispers. No claiming? No reveal? What kind of bond was this? But Briar couldn't focus on them. She was staring at her husband, at this cold, mysterious king who had just protected her twice in the span of 5 minutes, who had defended her against accusations and kept her secrets hidden from 500 prying eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. A flicker of warmth passed through his winter gaze, there and gone, too fast to name. "Don't thank me yet," he murmured back, so quietly only she could hear. Then he took her arm and led her from the temple, leaving the court to their whispers and speculation. She was queen of Valanthir now, and she had no idea what that meant. The queen's chambers were larger than the entire house Briar had grown up in. A canopied bed dominated the center of the room, draped in silks of silver and blue. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, overlooking the moonlit gardens below. A fire crackled in a marble hearth, filling the space with warmth that should have been comforting but only emphasized how cold she felt inside. Briar stood in the middle of the room, still wearing her wedding dress, still veiled, still trembling. The servants who had escorted her here had been kind. They'd offered to help her undress, to draw a bath, to bring food and wine. She'd declined everything. She needed to think. She needed to understand what she'd agreed to. But before she could organize her thoughts, the door opened. The king stepped inside and closed it behind him. They stared at each other across the vast room. He'd removed his formal jacket, leaving him in a white shirt that emphasized the unnatural pallor of his skin. His black hair was loose around his shoulders. In the firelight, with his sharp features softened by shadow, he looked almost human. Almost. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said quietly. Briar's laugh came out harsher than intended. "You're the Alpha King. Fear seems appropriate. I've told you I won't claim you. I meant it. Then why are you here?" He moved further into the room, not toward her, but toward the window. He stood with his back to her, staring out at the moonlit gardens. "Because it's expected," he said. "A king visits his queen on their wedding night. The servants will notice if I don't. They'll talk. And you care what servants think? I care about protecting this arrangement." He turned to face her. "If the court believes our bond is incomplete, they'll challenge it. Lords like Harwick will petition to have the marriage annulled. Your identity as Voidborn will be used against us both." Briar's hands curled at her sides. "So this is politics." "Everything is politics." She should have felt relieved. He was here for appearances, nothing more. He would spend a few hours in her chambers, let the servants draw their conclusions, then return to his own wing. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Disappointment? Loneliness? Something she couldn't name and didn't want to examine. "Very well," she said stiffly. "I'll take the bed. You can have the chaise." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Generous. He crossed to the chaise by the fire and sat, movements precise and controlled. Briar watched him for a moment, then turned away to change. Behind the privacy screen, she removed the heavy wedding dress with clumsy fingers. The seamstress had provided a nightgown of pale silk, delicate and revealing. Briar stared at it, then grabbed a thick robe from the wardrobe instead, wrapping it tightly around herself before emerging. The king was still sitting on the chaise, but his eyes were closed. In repose, without the mask of cold authority, he looked exhausted. No, not exhausted. Ill. Briar found herself moving closer without meaning to. The firelight illuminated details she'd missed before. The faint blue tinge to his lips. The slight tremor in his hands. The way his chest rose and fell in shallow, careful breaths. "You're dying," she said. Not a question. A statement. His eyes opened. Storm gray meeting her gaze without flinching. "Yes. How long have you known?" 8 years. He shifted, the movement revealing a flash of something at his throat. A mark, just visible above his collar. Old and silver, like a scar that had never fully healed. Since Lady Corinth? Briar's breath caught. She didn't just die. Something happened. We completed our bond. His voice was flat, empty. The moment I claimed her, the moment our connection sealed, she collapsed. Her heart stopped. The healers couldn't explain it. I couldn't explain it. He paused. Not until my mother told me the truth. What truth? My bloodline carries a curse. He said it simply, as if discussing the weather. The kings of Valanther cannot complete a mate bond. If we do, our mate dies instantly, and we follow slowly. The cold you feel when you touch me, the pallor, the weakness. It's the curse consuming me from within. Briar's legs weakened. She sat on the edge of the bed without meaning to. You've been dying for 8 years? The process is gradual, painful. He looked at her with something like dark humor. The healers give me another 2 years at most, perhaps 3 if I'm fortunate. And you married me because I need an heir, because the kingdom needs stability, because a wife, even one I never claim, provides political protection that a dying bachelor cannot. He tilted his head. And because you're void-born. Briar flinched. You think my curse will what? Cancel out yours? No. For the first time, his mask cracked enough to reveal genuine weariness beneath. I think your curse means you understand what it is to carry death inside you. I think it means you won't expect something from me I can never give. The words hung between them. Briar thought of her sister's warning. He will discover what you are. But he already knew. He'd known from the beginning. He'd chosen her precisely because she was broken. We're quite the pair, she whispered. We are. Silence settled over the room, heavy but not uncomfortable. The fire crackled. The moon drifted behind clouds. Briar pulled her robe tighter, suddenly aware of how close they were, how intimate this moment felt despite everything. You should sleep, the king said quietly. Tomorrow will be difficult. What happens tomorrow? The court will want to inspect their new queen. His jaw tightened. They'll be looking for weaknesses, reasons to doubt you. And you? He rose from the chaise, and Briar noticed again how carefully he moved, how much effort each motion seemed to require. I'll be there, he said. I protect what is mine. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. For a moment he seemed to want to say something more. His winter gaze found hers through the firelight, and the ice behind his eyes cracked, just barely. Then it was gone. Good night, Briar, he said. Wait. He stopped. Briar rose from the bed, moved toward him before she could think better of it. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough to feel the cold radiating from his skin. You called me by my name, she said softly. Not queen, not wife. Briar. Is that a problem? No. She shook her head. No, it's just... No one's called me that in 3 years. His expression softened in a way she hadn't thought possible for a face so sharp. Then I'll call you that when we're alone, he said. And you'll call me Drystan. He left before she could respond. Briar stood in the empty room, her heart doing something strange and unfamiliar in her chest. She pressed her palm against it, feeling the flutter beneath her ribs. It meant nothing. It couldn't mean anything. They were 2 curses bound by contract, 2 dying wolves pretending at a marriage that would never be real. But long after the fire burned low and the moon sank toward dawn, Briar lay awake in her vast empty bed, thinking about storm-colored eyes and cold hands and the way he'd said her name, like it mattered, like she mattered. The weeks that followed rewrote everything Briar thought she understood. She had prepared for coldness, for distance, for a husband who would treat her as furniture, as a political necessity to be tolerated but never truly seen. Instead, she found herself married to an enigma. Drystan kept his word. He never came to her chambers after that first night. He never touched her beyond what public appearances required. When they stood together before the court, his hand at the small of her back was formal, distant, and correct. But his eyes told a different story. She caught him watching her during council meetings, his winter gaze following her movements as she learned the intricacies of court politics. She noticed how he positioned himself between her and Lord Harwick whenever they occupied the same room. She saw the way his jaw tightened when nobles whispered about her origins, as if their cruelty caused him physical pain. And every evening, without fail, he joined her for dinner. "It's expected," he'd said the first time he appeared in her private dining room. Expected by whom? By tradition, by the court. A pause. By me. So they dined together, night after night. Conversation stilted at first, then gradually easier. He asked about her day. She asked about his. He explained the complex web of alliances that held the 5 kingdoms together. She shared observations about the court's dynamics, the petty rivalries and hidden allegiances she'd noticed from her years as an invisible servant. He listened, actually listened, not with the dismissive patience of a man humoring his wife, but with genuine interest. "You see things others miss," he told her one evening. "I spent 3 years being no one. You learn to watch when no one's watching you back." His gaze intensified, holding hers across the candlelit table. "I'm watching now." Briar's cheeks warmed. She looked down at her plate. It meant nothing, she reminded herself. This was arrangement. Survival. 2 curses circling each other in a careful dance. But the dance was getting harder to maintain, especially when she noticed how much worse he was getting. It started with small things. The tremor in his hands when he lifted his wineglass. The slight stumble in his gait when he thought no one was looking. The way he leaned against door frames during long audiences, pretending casualness to hide the fact that standing exhausted him. The cold was spreading. Briar first confirmed it 3 weeks after their wedding, when their fingers brushed accidentally during a state dinner. She gasped. His skin had always been cold, but this was different. This was the cold of deep winter, of frozen lakes, of death creeping through living tissue. She could feel it through the brief contact, a wrongness that made her wolf recoil in distress. "Drystan," she whispered. His expression shuddered. "Don't. You're worse. The curse is—" "I said don't." His voice was sharp enough to cut. "This isn't your concern." But it was. Somehow, impossibly, it had become exactly her concern. That night, Briar went to the Royal Library. The archives of Valanthir stretched back thousands of years, containing records of every king who had ever sat on the winter throne. She searched through dusty volumes and crumbling scrolls, looking for any mention of the curse Drystan had described. She found it near dawn. "The Binding of Frost," the ancient text was titled. The pages were so old they threatened to disintegrate at her touch. In the Third Age of Valanthir, King Aldrich sought to ensure his bloodline would never be weakened by emotion. He contracted a coven of witches to curse his descendants, ensuring that any king who completed a mate bond would trigger the death of both bonded wolves. The curse was designed to make Valanthir's rulers immune to manipulation through love. Briar's hand shook as she continued reading. The curse feeds on the bond itself. Once triggered, it cannot be reversed by ordinary means. The afflicted king will experience progressive symptoms: cold extremities, weakness, difficulty breathing. Death typically occurs within 10 years of initial triggering. 8 years. Drystan had been suffering for 8 years. However, the text continued. The witches who created the curse left one possibility for its undoing. The blood of Aldrich was cursed to carry frost. Only one who carries void could absorb it. Briar stared at the words until they blurred. Void. Voidborn. Her curse wasn't death. It wasn't poison. It was absorption. Taking in what others expelled. carrying what no one else could hold. She wasn't meant to kill her mates. She was meant to save them. The library doors crashed open behind her. "Your Majesty." A guard stood in the entrance, breathless. "The king has collapsed." The book fell from Briar's hands. She ran. The scent of fear hit her before she reached the throne room. Sharp and acrid, it filled the corridors like smoke, growing stronger with every step. Briar pushed past startled servants and frozen guards, her pulse pounding a desperate rhythm against her ribs. She found him sprawled on the cold stone floor. Nobles surrounded him in a panicked cluster, their voices a cacophony of alarm. The Queen Mother knelt beside her son, her ancient face twisted with grief, and Drystan lay motionless, his skin so pale it was nearly translucent, frost spreading visibly across his cheekbones. "Move!" Briar shoved through the crowd without caring about propriety. She dropped to her knees beside him, the stone bruising her through her thin dress. Her hands found his face, and she recoiled at the cold. Ice. He was ice everywhere, frost creeping across his lips, his closed eyelids, and the strong line of his jaw. Drystan. She gripped his shoulders, feeling the cold seep through her palms. "Drystan, wake up." "Nothing. He won't wake." The Queen Mother's voice was hollow. "The curse has accelerated. Something triggered it." "What? What could have—" "Emotion." The old woman's silver eyes found Briar's. Strong emotion toward his mate. Something he felt. Something he couldn't control. Briar's chest seized with understanding. The dinners. The conversations. The way he watched her. The way he said her name. He'd been feeling something. Despite everything. Despite his vows and his walls and his certainty that they would never be more than a political arrangement, he'd been feeling something for her. And it was killing him. "There has to be a way," Briar said desperately. "The curse was created. It can be broken. No one has ever broken it. Because no one has tried the right method." Briar looked at the Queen Mother, seeing the ancient wolf anew. "You knew. When you saw me at the banquet, you knew I was voidborn. You knew what that meant." Guilt and hope warred across the Queen Mother's weathered features. "I suspected," she admitted. "The sight showed me your bond, but it also showed me something else. A darkness inside you that wasn't darkness at all. An emptiness that was actually capacity. To absorb the curse. Perhaps? Then why didn't you tell me?" Briar's voice broke. "Why let him suffer? Why let him think there was no hope?" "Because I wasn't certain." The Queen Mother touched her son's frozen cheek with trembling fingers. "And because the cure might kill you instead." Briar went still. "What do you mean?" "The curse must go somewhere. If you try to absorb it, if you try to pull that much darkness into yourself." The old woman's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You might not survive." The nobles around them had gone silent, listening. Lord Harwick stood among them, his expression unreadable. Briar looked down at Drystan's face, at the frost spreading across his features, at the man who had defended her, protected her, seen her when she'd spent 3 years being invisible. The man who was dying because he'd begun to feel something for her. "I don't care," she said. "Your Majesty." "I said I don't care." Briar's voice rang through the throne room, strong and clear and certain. "If I can save him, I will. If it kills me, so be it." She laughed, the sound bitter and bright. "I've been called death my entire life. Maybe it's time I became something else." She gathered Drystan into her arms, ignoring the biting cold of his skin. "Tell me what to do," she said to the Queen Mother. The old woman hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You must complete the bond." A commotion at the edge of the crowd drew Briar's attention. She looked up to find Seren pushing through the nobles, her sister's beautiful face pale with shock. "Briar." Seren's voice trembled. "Is it true?" Is he dying? Yes. Briar's tone was flat. Unless I can save him. Seren stared at the frost-covered king, at the sister she'd tormented for years, cradling him in her arms. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usual composure shattered. Whatever mask Seren had worn for years seemed to have finally cracked. Perhaps the sight of the king dying, of Briar willing to sacrifice herself, had shown her something she couldn't unsee. What can I do? Seren whispered. Briar blinked, caught off guard. What? To help. What can I do to help? For a long moment, Briar just stared at her. Then she shook her head. Clear the room. Get everyone out. If this works... She looked down at Drystan's frozen face. If this works, he'll need privacy to recover. If it doesn't... She didn't finish the sentence. Serene nodded and turned to the crowd, her voice sharp with command. Everyone out. Now. By order of the Queen. The nobles began to disperse, casting curious glances over their shoulders. Lord Harwick lingered longer than most, his eyes fixed on Briar with something that might have been grudging respect. Then he too was gone. Only the Queen Mother remained. Come, she said softly. We'll move him to his chambers, and then we'll see if fate was right about you after all. They laid him on the massive bed in the king's chambers, his body so cold the sheets seemed to frost at his touch. Briar sat beside him, holding his frozen hand in both of hers. The Queen Mother had explained what needed to happen. The words echoed in her mind like a death knell. You must bite him. Mark him as yours. And he must do the same to you. He's unconscious, Briar had protested. How can he? The wolf knows. Even when the man sleeps, the wolf remains aware. If his wolf accepts you, truly accepts you, the marking will complete even in this state. And if his wolf doesn't accept me? The Queen Mother hadn't answered that question. Now, alone with him in the darkness, Briar traced the planes of his frozen face with trembling fingers. He looked peaceful in his unconsciousness, younger. The lines of pain and responsibility smoothed away. I'm going to save you, she whispered. And then I'm going to tell you I love you properly, when you're awake to hear it. She leaned down, her lips brushing his frozen forehead. Then she tilted her head, found the curve of his neck where his pulse should have been beating, and bit down. The world exploded. Pain. That was her first coherent thought. Pain unlike anything she'd ever experienced, coursing through her veins like liquid fire and frozen lightning combined. The bond snapped into place with savage intensity, and suddenly she could feel him. Not just his body beneath her, but his mind, his heart, his wolf. His wolf was howling. Trapped in darkness, buried beneath layers of ice, Drystan's wolf was crying out for help, for warmth. For her. I'm here. She thought desperately through the bond. I'm here. Hold on. She felt his wolf turn toward her, felt the desperate hope that flickered in its frozen chest. And then the curse noticed her. It rose like a serpent from the depths of him, a darkness so cold it burned. Briar felt it probe the bond between them, testing this new connection, this pathway it had never encountered before. Then it struck. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She gasped, her body arching, her hands clawing at the bedsheets. It was worse than she'd imagined, worse than anything she'd prepared for. The curse was ancient and hungry, and it poured through their bond with gleeful malice. Take it, she told herself. You were made for this. Take it. She opened herself. Not her body, but something deeper. The void inside her that she'd always thought was emptiness, was wrongness, was the curse her father claimed made her death incarnate. It wasn't empty at all. It was hungry. The darkness rushed into her, and instead of destroying her, she consumed it. Like water into sand, like shadows into night, the curse flowed into her void and disappeared. More. She needed more. She reached through the bond, found the places where the curse had rooted deepest, and pulled. Drystan gasped beneath her. His eyes flew open. Storm-gray eyes, clear and focused, meeting hers with shock and wonder and something else entirely. "Briar." His voice was hoarse, broken. "What are you—" "Stay still." She was shaking, sweat and tears streaming down her face. Almost. She pulled the last fragments of curse from his heart, felt them dissolve into her void, felt the bond between them shimmer and settle into something new, something warm, something permanent. And beneath her, she felt his wolf surge forward with primal instinct, felt him rise despite his weakness, his mouth finding her throat, his teeth sinking into her flesh to complete what she had started. The claiming mark burned like a brand, but this time, the pain was welcome. Then Briar collapsed. Warmth. That was the first thing Briar noticed when consciousness returned. Warmth surrounding her, cradling her, seeping into bones that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten what heat felt like. The second thing she noticed was hands. Warm hands on her face, warm breath on her forehead, a warm voice saying her name over and over. "Briar, Briar, please. Open your eyes." She forced her eyelids apart. Drystan's face hovered above hers, his winter eyes bright with tears. Tears. The Alpha King of Valanther was crying. "You're awake." His voice cracked on the words. "Thank the gods. You're awake." Briar tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Drystan immediately reached for a cup of water, helping her drink with trembling hands. "How long?" she managed. 3 days. He set the cup aside, his hands returning to frame her face as if he couldn't bear to stop touching her. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. The healers said your body was processing something massive. They couldn't explain it." "The curse." "Yes." His jaw tightened. "My mother told me everything about what you found in the library, what you risked, what you did to save me." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask first? Would you have let me try if I had?" Silence. They both knew the answer. "You could have died," he said finally. "So could you. I was already dying. And I couldn't let that happen." The words burst out of her with more force than intended. "I couldn't watch you fade away, knowing there was something I could do. Knowing that the very thing everyone told me was a curse might actually be the answer." Drystan stared at her. "You barely know me," he said slowly. "I know enough." Briar pushed herself up despite her weakness, needing to face him properly. "I know you defended me when Lord Harwick tried to expose me. I know you gave me a veil so no one would see my shame. I know you came to dinner every night even though you didn't have to. I know you watched over me, protected me, and made me feel like I mattered for the first time in 3 years." Her voice broke. "I know I love you, Drystan. I don't know when it started or how it happened, but I do. And I couldn't let you die without telling you that." The room went utterly silent. Drystan's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and something raw and vulnerable beneath. "You love me?" he repeated. "Yes. Even knowing what I am, what I was willing to let happen." "What do you mean?" His hands fell from her face. He turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. "I married you expecting us both to remain cold," he said quietly. "I chose a void-born bride because I thought we'd be immune to each other. 2 curses canceling out, never actually connecting. You'd get protection and status. I'd get an heir and political stability. Neither of us would get hurt." He laughed, the sound bitter. "Instead, I fell for you within a week. Every dinner, every conversation, every glimpse of who you actually are beneath the fear and the hiding. You were brilliant and brave and so desperately kind, despite everything the world had done to you." He turned back to her, his eyes raw with emotion. and I knew every feeling I had was killing me faster, and I couldn't stop. Briar's chest ached with understanding. That's why the curse accelerated. Yes. He sat on the edge of the bed, close but not touching. I tried to fight it, tried to keep my distance, to remember that caring for you was a death sentence. But then you'd say something unexpected or look at me with those eyes and… He shook his head. I was doomed from the start. And now? Now? He looked at her, really looked, and Briar saw the walls crumbling, the ice melting, the man emerging from behind the mask of the Winter King. Now the curse is gone. For the first time in 8 years, I feel warm. I feel alive. His voice dropped. And I feel terrified. Of what? Of losing you. He reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. His skin was warm, actually warm. I've spent so long preparing to die that I don't know how to live. I don't know how to be a husband who actually loves his wife, who shares his life with her, who… Then learn, Briar interrupted. Learn with me. She pulled him closer, and when their lips met, there was no cold. No distance, no contract or arrangement or political convenience. Just two broken people finding wholeness in each other. The kiss deepened. His hands tangled in her hair, her arms wrapped around his neck. The bond between them sang with joy, with relief, with love finally acknowledged. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Drysdale pressed his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I should have said it before. I should have told you the moment I realized, instead of hiding like a coward. You were protecting yourself. I was protecting the wrong thing. He pulled back to look at her. You are the only thing worth protecting. You and whatever life we build together. Briar smiled, the expression feeling foreign on her face. She hadn't smiled in years, not truly. Then let's build it, she said. 1 week later, the truth tore through the castle like wildfire. Briar was in the Queen's study, reviewing correspondence with the Queen Mother, when the royal guards brought in the prisoner. Lord Ashford looked smaller than she remembered. Her father had always been a large man in her memories, towering and terrible, his voice a thunder that shook the walls when he was displeased. But the man before her now was diminished, graying, hunched, his fine clothes rumpled from the dungeons where he'd been held since his arrest 3 days prior. Briar. He said her name like a curse. Or should I say, Your Majesty? You may say nothing at all. Drysdale's voice came from behind her, cold with contained fury. He'd insisted on being present for this, on standing beside her when she faced the man who had destroyed her life. On what charges am I held? Lord Ashford demanded. I've done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong? Drysdale stepped forward, placing himself between Briar and her father. You branded your own daughter, cast her out to survive as a servant, tried to sell her into slavery when you discovered she was still alive. She's void-born, she's cursed. Everything I did was to protect my family from… lies. The new voice came from the doorway. Briar turned to find Seren standing there, her sister's beautiful face pale but determined. Behind her stood a woman Briar didn't recognize, elderly and stooped, wearing the simple robes of a healer. Seren? Lord Ashford's composure cracked. What are you doing? Telling the truth. Seren walked into the room, her steps steady despite her obvious fear. For the first time in my miserable life, I'm telling the truth. She stopped beside Briar, not looking at her sister, but not fleeing either. I found healer Marwyn, Seren said, the woman who attended Lord Harwick's son during his final illness. Father paid her to keep silent, paid her quite handsomely, actually. That's ridiculous, Lord Ashford sputtered. I never… You poisoned him. Serene's voice was flat. Not with void-born curse, because there is no such thing. You poisoned him with nightshade, administered slowly over the 2 months of his engagement to Briar. You killed him, father, and you let Briar take the blame. The room went absolutely silent. Briar's mind reeled, the world tilting on its axis. Everything she'd believed about herself was crumbling. Why? She heard herself ask. Why would you? Because I hated you. Lord Ashford's composure shattered completely, revealing the monster beneath. From the moment you were born during that cursed eclipse, I knew you were wrong. Your mother died bringing you into this world. You killed her with your first breath. Our mother died of blood loss. Seren cut in. The healer's records are quite clear. There was nothing supernatural about it. Nothing voidborn. Just a difficult birth and not enough time to stop the bleeding. Lies! All lies! Lord Ashford lunged forward, restrained by the guards. She's a curse. A stain. Everything that went wrong in our family was because of her. Everything that went wrong, Briar said slowly, was because of you. She stepped around Drystan, facing her father directly for the first time in 3 years. You couldn't accept that Mother's death was natural. You needed someone to blame. So you created a monster. Her voice strengthened. You spread lies about void-born wolves. You convinced everyone, including me, that I was cursed. When I was betrothed to Lord Harwick's son, when I might have finally escaped your control, you murdered him and let me take the blame. You have no proof. We have the healer's testimony. Drystan's voice was ice. We have records of your payments to her. We have letters you wrote to other nobles, warning them about your cursed daughter, ensuring no one would ever want her. He stepped beside Briar, his hand finding hers. And we have the truth about void-born wolves. My mother's sight confirmed it. Briar was never cursed to cause death. She was blessed to prevent it, to absorb darkness that would destroy others. He looked at her with undisguised wonder. She saved my life with the very power you convinced her was poison. Lord Ashford's face contorted with rage. She's still nothing, a servant, a disgrace. No matter what crown you put on her head, she'll always be your queen. The words came from Seren. She stepped forward, and for the first time she looked directly at Briar. Tears streamed down her perfect cheeks. She'll always be my sister, Seren continued, voice breaking. And I'll spend the rest of my life making amends for what I allowed to happen to her. She dropped to her knees before Briar. I believed him. I believed everything he said about you. I watched them brand you and did nothing. I let you suffer for a crime you didn't commit. A sob escaped her. I'm so sorry, Briar. I'm so sorry. Briar stared at her sister. This woman who had tormented her throughout their childhood. Who had smiled when their father beat her. Who had appeared at her servants' quarters to threaten her just weeks ago. She should hate her. Should turn away and let her grovel. Instead, Briar reached down and took Seren's hands. Get up, she said quietly. Seren looked up, confused. I said get up. Briar pulled her sister to her feet. You were a child, raised by a monster. We both were. The only difference was that his hatred was directed at me, while his manipulation was directed at you. How can you forgive me? I don't know if I can. Not yet. Briar's voice was honest. But I'm willing to try. If you're willing to be the sister I never had. Seren nodded frantically, tears still falling. Lord Ashford watched the exchange with visible disgust. Take him away, Drystan commanded. He'll stand trial for murder, conspiracy, and treason against the crown. The guards dragged him toward the door. At the threshold, Lord Ashford twisted to look back at Briar one final time. You'll destroy everything you touch, he spat, just like you always have. Briar met his eyes without flinching. No, father, she said calmly. That was always you. The doors closed behind him with a boom of finality. In the silence that followed, Drystan pulled Briar close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It's over," he murmured. "Almost." Briar looked toward the Queen Mother. "What about Lord Harwick? He deserves to know the truth about his son." The Queen Mother nodded slowly. "I'll see to it personally. He spent years blaming you for something you didn't do. Learning that his son's true murderer has finally been found." She paused. "It won't bring back what he lost, but perhaps it will bring him some measure of peace." Briar leaned into Drystan's warmth, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. Not cold anymore. Alive. 6 months later, the Queen of Valanthir walked through the palace gardens at sunset. Her belly had begun to swell with the child growing inside her, the heir that Drystan had once thought he'd never live to see. The healers said everything was progressing beautifully. A daughter, they predicted. Strong and healthy and blessed. Blessed, they whispered. Doubly blessed, with a father freed from an ancient curse and a mother whose void had transformed into something altogether different. Not emptiness, capacity. The ability to hold what others could not carry. To absorb pain and darkness and transform it into something bearable. The Voidborn were not cursed at all, the scholars had discovered. They were rare gifts, born during eclipses when the boundaries between worlds grew thin. In ancient times, they had been healers of the spirit, wolves who could take the burdens of others into themselves and neutralize them. Only fear and superstition had transformed that gift into a curse. Briar touched her rounded belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. "There you are." She turned to find Drystan approaching through the roses. He looked different now than he had 6 months ago. Color in his cheeks, warmth in his gaze. A smile that came easily, that transformed his sharp features into something beautiful, not cold, not distant, alive. "The council meeting ran long," he said, sliding his arms around her from behind, his hands joining hers on her belly. "Something about trade negotiations with the Eastern Kingdoms. I may have tuned out after the first hour." Briar laughed. "You're a terrible king." "I'm an excellent king. I'm simply a bored king." He pressed a kiss to her neck, to the claiming mark he'd placed there the night they'd truly completed their bond. "Besides, I have better things to think about than tariffs and shipping routes. Such as my wife." His hands moved gently over her belly. "And my daughter. And the fact that in 4 months, I'm going to be a father." The wonder in his voice made Briar's throat tight. "Scared?" she asked softly. "Terrified." He turned her in his arms, cupping her face in his warm hands. "But not of the curse. Not anymore." His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. "I'm scared of being a good father. Of raising a child in a world that can be so cruel. Of protecting both of you from everything that might try to hurt you." "We'll protect each other," Briar said. "That's what families do." "Is that what we are now? A family?" She thought of Seren, who had moved into the palace and was slowly, painfully, learning to be a sister. She thought of the Queen Mother, who treated her with genuine affection now, who told her stories of the kingdom's history and taught her the secrets that queens needed to know. She thought of the servants who had once been her colleagues, who now called her Your Majesty, with respect instead of mockery. She thought of Lord Harwick, who had sought her out just last week, his eyes red-rimmed but his voice steady as he apologized for the accusations he'd made. Learning the truth about his son's murder had shattered something in him, but it had also begun to heal the hatred he'd carried for so long. She thought of the daughter growing inside her, who would never know the fear and isolation that had defined her own childhood. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what we are." Drystan kissed her, slow and deep, and Briar melted into him the way she had every day for the past 6 months. The bond between them hummed with contentment, with love, with the certainty that they had found in each other what neither had ever expected to have. When they broke apart, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "I have something for you," Dryston said. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside, nestled against a dark fabric, lay a pendant on a silver chain. The stone was unlike anything Briar had ever seen, black as midnight but shot through with veins of brilliant gold. "It's called a void stone," he explained. "They're incredibly rare. Found only in the mountains where the black eclipses cast their shadows." He lifted it from the box, fastening it around her neck. "The scholars say they were sacred to the ancient Voidborn, symbols of their power." Briar touched the stone, feeling warmth radiate from its surface. "It's beautiful." "So are you." He tilted her chin up, his storm-colored eyes holding hers. "I never told you, did I? That day at the banquet, when my mother pointed you out. I was furious. I'd spent years convincing myself I could never have a mate, never risk another wolf the way I'd risked Corintha. And then this servant girl in the corner was suddenly my fate. And now I understand why the sight never fails." He smiled, the expression transforming his face. "You were always meant for me, Briar, and I was always meant for you. We just needed to stop being afraid long enough to see it." Briar rose on her toes and kissed him again. Behind them, the palace glowed with warm light. Inside, their family waited. Their kingdom thrived. Their future stretched ahead like an unwritten story full of possibility. They had come to each other broken, cursed, convinced they were unworthy of love. They had found healing instead. "I love you," Briar whispered against his lips. "I love you too." Dryston pulled her closer, his hand once again finding her belly, feeling their daughter move beneath his palm. "Both of you. Always." The sun set over Villanthir, and for the first time in centuries, the winter throne was warm. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and would like to support the channel, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know what you thought. Your support means everything, and I read every single comment. Until next time.